The day my daughter handed me a clipboard at my own kitchen table, I should have known something was wrong. I just didn't know yet that the worst part wasn't the clipboard. It was what she'd already done before she ever drove up to Sudbury to see me. Good day to all of you, and thank you for being here with me again. It's Carol. If this story means something to you, please give it a like, stay with me to the very end, and tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. My name is Margaret Ruth Calloway, though most people who've known me longer than 10 minutes just call me Peggy. I'm 68 years old, and for most of my life, I lived in a stubborn little brick house on a street in Sudbury, Ontario, where the snow comes in October and doesn't always leave before May. My husband and I bought that house in 1981 with money we didn't really have, and we filled it with 2 children and 41 winters and one very bad-tempered orange cat who outlived us all in spirit, if not in fact. My husband's name was Roy. He drove a haul truck for one of the nickel mines for 33 years, and his hands were the size of dinner plates, and he never once in our marriage said a cruel thing to me on purpose. He died 2 springs ago in April, the way northern men so often die, doing something he'd been told 100 times to leave alone. He was up on the porch roof clearing the last of the ice dams, and his heart stopped, and he came down, and that was that. The paramedic, a girl young enough to be my granddaughter, held my hand in the driveway and told me he likely felt almost nothing. I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count. I still don't know if it was meant to comfort me or her. After the funeral, after the last of the squares and casseroles disappeared from my freezer, and the sympathy cards stopped arriving and the house got so quiet I could hear the fridge thinking, I started the work that nobody warns you about, the sorting. There is a terrible intimacy to going through a dead man's things. Every drawer is a small conversation with someone who can't answer back. I found his hockey pool spreadsheets going back to 1994. I found a Tim Hortons receipt in a coat pocket with a phone number written on the back in his blocky hand that turned out, when I worked up the nerve to call it, to belong to a furnace repairman who'd been dead longer than Roy. I found things that made me laugh out loud in an empty room and things that made me sit down on the floor and stay there a while. It was in the bottom drawer of his workbench, out in the garage, under a coffee can of mismatched bolts, that I found the envelope. It was a plain white envelope, the long kind, sealed shut. Nothing written on the front, but when I tilted it, something slid against the paper with a small metal sound, and when I opened it, a key fell into my palm, a little flat brass key, the kind that opens a safety deposit box, and folded around it a sheet of paper with an address written in Roy's handwriting, an address out on the other side of town near the Kingsway, a part of Sudbury I had no reason ever to visit, and under the address, 3 lines. Peggy, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Go to this address by yourself. Don't bring Brenda. Don't bring Brenda. Brenda is our daughter. She's 44. She lives down in Barrie now with her husband and the 2 grandkids I'd crawl over broken glass for. Roy adored her. He used to call her his right hand. So I read those 3 words, and then I read them again. And then I poured myself a glass of water and read them a 3rd time, because the part of me that had been married to that man for 41 years simply could not make sense of them. Why on God's green earth would my husband, with the last bit of planning he ever did on this side of life, tell me to keep our own daughter away from whatever was behind that door? I told myself a story, the way you do. I told myself it was nothing. Some old account, some embarrassing debt he'd been too proud to mention, some private thing men of his generation handled in the dark so as not to worry the women they loved. I told myself that several times. I noticed my hands were not quite steady while I did it. I put the envelope in my purse and went inside and made too much supper for one person, which I did every single night by then, and I ate it at the kitchen table with the radio on for company, and outside the April dark came down early and complete. That night I lay in the bed that still smelled faintly of his soap, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about how he hadn't written you, "Don't need to bring Brenda." He'd written, "Don't." One of those is a suggestion. The other one is a warning. I know the difference. I taught grade 4 for 26 years. I know exactly what a warning sounds like. I didn't do anything for 4 days. In those 4 days, I baked things I didn't eat. I let the phone ring. Brenda called twice, and both times the calls were short and warm, and somehow left me feeling like I'd been gently inspected. "Have you heard from the lawyer yet, Mum? You should really get that estate moving. These things have timelines, you know." She'd say things like that. She'd always been efficient. She works in mortgages at a brokerage down south, very good at her job, very comfortable with paper and numbers and the polite math of other people's money. I had never disliked her. I want to be clear about that. But I had also never been able to fully relax around her in a way I could never quite put into words. The same way you can't always say why a room feels cold. There was one phone call in particular, on the Wednesday. Brenda asked, very lightly, the way you'd ask about the weather, whether I'd come across any of her father's financial documents while I was sorting. "Just so things don't get accidentally tossed before the estate's settled," she said. And I stood there in my kitchen with that envelope sitting in the purse on the counter, not 3 feet from me. And I heard something in her voice I had honestly never let myself hear before. She wasn't asking the way you ask after something. She was asking the way you ask after something you're already looking for. On the 5th day, I drove to the address. I told no one. I just got in the car, an 11-year-old Corolla that Roy kept threatening to replace and never did, and I punched the address into the phone and I went. It was an ordinary street. Small bungalows, neat driveways, the kind of place where folks put their recycling bins out the night before and shovel each other's walks. The key fit the door of a small gray house at the end, single story with a covered front step and empty window boxes still waiting on spring. The driveway was bare. I sat in the car a good while. Then I went up, and I used the key, and the door opened. What I found was not what I'd been bracing for. There was no second family, no strange woman's coat in the closet, no photographs of people I'd never met. There was one clean, plain room set up as a little office. A desk, a filing cabinet, a wall safe behind a framed print of the Manitoulin shoreline. And on the desk, a sealed envelope with my name on it, written in Roy's hand. I sat down in the chair, and I opened it, and I read 4 pages that took the last 2 years of my marriage and turned them inside out. Roy had found out, about 14 months before he died, that Brenda and her husband had been quietly draining a registered account, a RIF that Roy had built up over decades of driving that truck, money that was meant, every cent of it, to keep me fed and warm and in my own house until the day I followed him. They hadn't just walked into a bank and stolen it. It was cleverer than that and worse. Brenda's husband had a financial planning license. He'd used it 2 years back when Roy had a small heart scare. They'd set up a power of attorney over certain accounts, just in case, just to make things easier. And they had used that authority to restructure things, to move money in amounts small enough never to trip an alarm, into accounts and a numbered company that, when you followed the thread, came back to Brenda's husband. Roy figured the total was somewhere north of $200,000. He hadn't confronted them. That was the part that broke my heart clean in two. He'd been afraid, not for himself, but for what it would do to the family, to the grandkids, to the idea of us. I was a coward about this, he wrote near the end, in that flat, blocky handwriting I'd have known anywhere. I kept thinking I'd find the right time. I'm sorry I left it to you. But you were always the brave one of the two of us, Peg. You just never had to prove it. Open the safe? I opened the safe. It was all there, the way only a man who'd spent his life around safety inspections would leave it. Account statements, a year of them. Printed emails. A USB stick, the power of attorney itself, with my husband's signature on it, set up while he still trusted them. Withdrawal after withdrawal, every one of them just under the threshold that makes a bank ask questions, routed and rerouted until they landed somewhere clean. There was an email, I read it standing up, I couldn't sit for it, between Brenda and someone she only called by initials, talking about finishing the moves before the estate gets complicated. It was dated 9 days before my husband died on our porch roof. I sat in that gray house for the better part of 2 hours. I read everything twice. I took a photo of every single page with my phone, and I copied the contents of the USB stick up to the cloud using the Wi-Fi password Roy had stuck to the inside of the safe door on a little yellow note. And by the time I locked the door behind me and drove home through the long northern evening, I had made up my mind about exactly one thing. I was not going to call Brenda. I was not going to let her or her husband know that I had found a single page of it, not until I had sat across a desk from a lawyer. And not the lawyer who'd done Roy's and my wills either, because his name was on some of that restructuring paperwork. And I did not yet understand why. I needed somebody new, somebody who owed nothing to anybody with my last name. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a pot of tea going cold and looked up estate lawyers in Sudbury. I made a list of 4. I crossed off the first because his firm had done closings for Brenda's husband's company. I found it on a Chamber of Commerce page, of all places. I crossed off the second because he retired. The third was a woman named Priya Santu and practiced 20-some years, and the reviews of her used words like thorough and, in one I read 3 times, does not get rattled by difficult families. I called her office first thing the next morning and got an appointment for the Friday. It was on the Thursday that Brenda's tone changed. I hadn't gone back to the gray house, but I drove past that neighborhood on an errand and parked 2 doors down from it. I saw a car I was nearly certain I knew. A silver SUV her husband leased. Could have been a coincidence. It's not an exclusive street, but I noted it, the way you note the first soft creak in ice you're standing on. That evening she called again, and the warmth was still there, but there was something running underneath it now. A current. "Mum," she said. She's called me Mum her whole life, of course, but it landed different. "I was thinking I'd drive up this weekend and help you go through Dad's office, just so nothing important gets thrown out before everything's settled." "That's thoughtful," I said. "But I've already been through his office." A pause. Brief, but I heard it. "Oh. Did everything seem in order?" "Everything I needed," I said. Another pause. "Of course. Well, if you need a hand with the filing cabinet or any of those old account papers, I've got it handled, Brenda. But thank you." I hung up and I stood in my kitchen and my heart was doing something unpleasant behind my ribs. Roy used to talk when he came home from work about what he called the load-bearing piece. The one bolt, the one beam, that if you pull it, everything above it comes down. Brenda was looking for the load-bearing piece. She didn't yet know if I'd found it, but she'd started to suspect that I had found something, and she had decided to come north and put her hands in that filing cabinet herself. Friday morning, I drove downtown and rode the elevator up and sat across a desk from a calm woman with a yellow legal pad, and I told her all of it. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, she uncapped her pen and asked if I brought the documents. I lifted them out of my purse and set the originals on her desk, and she read for a long time, and then she looked up at me over her glasses and said, "Mrs. Calloway, You have a case, a strong one. She moved fast after that, faster than I expected anything in this country to move. She filed a formal objection to the account changes on the grounds I'd never given informed consent. She made it clear the power of attorney had died the moment Roy did. That's the thing people get wrong, she told me. A POA is a living document. It has no power over a dead man's estate, none at all, and anything done under its color afterward is a separate problem again. She requested a full accounting of the restructured RIF, and she flagged the file for the kind of authorities who look at this sort of thing, because moving someone's money around with a forged or improper signature is not just a family squabble in this country, it's fraud, and fraud has consequences that don't care how sorry anyone is afterward. Your husband documented this, she said at one point, mostly to herself, turning the pages the way a man documents a structural failure. Cause and effect. Step by step. He drove a truck for the mines, I said. But he had that kind of mind. He always said if you can't show your work, you don't really know it. She looked at me. It's going to serve you very well. The call from Brenda's husband came 4 days later. Not from her. From him. And that told me a great deal. That they'd sat down and decided a son-in-law's voice might land more gently on me than a daughter's would. They weren't entirely wrong about that either. He was smooth on the phone, controlled, a man reading from a script he'd practiced in the car. Peggy, we need to talk about what you've been doing. You hired a lawyer without telling us. I'm allowed to hire a lawyer. Of course you are. A pause. But you have to understand what an audit, an investigation, what that does to people. My license, Peggy, my whole reputation is tied to what? I said. Silence. I found what Roy left me, I said. I found the statements. I found the emails. I know what the two of you did. The silence on the line changed shape entirely. And then I heard her. Brenda, come on. She'd been there the whole time listening. Her voice was harder than his, more deliberate. Mom, you are making a serious mistake. What you think you found is not what it looks like. Dad knew. He agreed to all of it. There were conversations. Then you'll have no trouble at all showing that to the auditors, I said. Her voice dropped. Not a shout. Something worse than a shout. Something level and cold. If you push this, you will lose your son-in-law, you'll lose me, and you'll drag those kids through it. Is that what you want? To blow up your family over money. At your age? At your age. There it was. I held the phone very steady. If my daughter can be lost, I said, just because her mother asked for what's legally hers, then I lost her long before this phone call. Don't contact me directly again. Anything you've got to say, you say it to my lawyer. I hung up, and I sat in Roy's old recliner a long while after. And when I finally looked down at my hands, they were perfectly still. I was surprised by that. I'd expected them to shake. It was a friend who got me through the worst of it, the way it usually is. Her name is Lorna. We've known each other 30 years, since we both ended up on the same fundraising committee at the church and discovered over a folding table full of raffle tickets that we shared an identical, deep, holy hatred of meetings that ran long. She's a retired nurse, widowed herself since the year of the big ice storm, and she has a way of saying the true thing without it feeling like surgery. I told her everything one Sunday, all of it, because keeping it locked in my own chest had started to feel like carrying a cinder block up a flight of stairs. She listened. When I was done, she was quiet a moment, and then she said, "Peggy, that girl's husband has been waiting on Roy to die for years." And she let him. It was not a kind thing to say. It was a true thing. "How can you know that?" I asked her. "Because I watched them at your 40th, she said. People who love you look at you. People who are doing arithmetic on you look at the room. The offer came the next week, in writing, hand-delivered to my mailbox, which told me something too, because the person who put it there hadn't bothered to knock. It was civil in its language and surgical in its purpose. $70,000 framed as a voluntary family gift in exchange for dropping everything. And near the bottom, a line I read twice. At this stage of your life, a long legal fight may cost you more in time and in health than the outcome is worth. At this stage of your life, she'd used a version of that twice now, on the phone and on the page. I understood it for what it was, not cruelty for its own sake. A calculation. They had decided I could be made to feel old and tired and not worth the fight. I brought it to Priya. She read it with a flat, professional calm I'd come to find steadying. 70,000, she said, when the figure is closer to 250. She set it down. They're frightened, Mrs. Calloway. This number tells me exactly how frightened. People who make an offer like this and get told no tend to escalate once before they fold. So be ready for that. I was ready, more or less. What I didn't expect was how ready I'd feel because of where I'd started going on Tuesday evenings. Lorna had been after me for months to come to a group that met in the church basement on Larch Street. Widows, mostly, a handful of women between 60 and 80 who drank bad coffee out of paper cups and told the truth to each other. I'd resisted it the way I resist most things that require being seen by strangers. I'm glad I gave in. One of them, a woman who'd spent 3 winters in court over her late husband's business partners, looked at me over her cup and said, "The first year, dear, they're testing you. They want to see how much you'll swallow. After that, they think they know." I drove home from that basement feeling, for the first time since April, something that wasn't grief and wasn't rage. It was closer to company. I wasn't alone in this. I'd just forgotten to look up and notice the room was full. They came on a Saturday in June. I saw the silver SUV roll into my driveway from the kitchen window while I was waiting on the kettle. No call, no warning. That alone told me everything about the visit before I'd opened the door. He came up the walk with the face he'd worn since he was a young man courting my daughter, open and earnest and reasonable. She came up behind him, which was not like her. She is not a woman who walks behind anyone, carrying a little white box from a bakery on Elgin she knew I liked. That box sat on my coffee table the whole visit, unopened. Neither of us so much as looked at it twice. We sat in the front room. I poured tea for myself and not for them, because a person needs something to do with her hands at a time like that. He started. He was sorry, he said. Sorry for the phone call. Sorry for how things had gotten. They'd been under such financial strain. The rates, the kids, the cost of everything now. He never once used the word stole. He said borrowed against the inheritance. He said an informal family arrangement. He said something Roy understood. And the whole time he said it, he looked at the rug, at his own hands, at the window, anywhere in the room but at me. Then she leaned forward and her voice dropped into something soft and intimate, woman to woman. "Mum, this has been a brutal year. Losing Dad. Doing all this alone. The last thing in the world I want is for you to spend whatever time you've got left in depositions and courtrooms. You deserve peace. You deserve to be with your grandkids. If you'll just drop it, we can work something out between us. Something fair." I thought about that bakery box. I thought about the word fair. How easily it comes to the mouth of someone who has taken a thing that wasn't theirs, how they reach for it like it's a tool they're entitled to. And I thought about Roy at that desk in the gray house alone, printing every page, building the case he was too frightened to ever use so that I would have it when I needed it. He'd done that work by himself. I was not about to let it come to nothing. I set down my cup. What you took, I said, was about $250,000. The letter offered 70. So what number is it you mean when you say fair? Her face shifted just slightly. That's not— Fairness isn't a number, Mum. No, I said. It isn't a feeling either. And the number I can prove to a judge is 250,000 plus my costs. He started to speak. She put a hand on his arm and he stopped. We didn't come here to negotiate in your living room, she said. And the warmth went out of her like the sun going behind cloud. And you realized the blue sky was behind it the whole time. We came to give you a chance to handle this quietly. You've said no. I just want to be sure you understand what you're choosing. I understand it perfectly, I said. I think you should go. And then he looked at me. Really looked, not at her for the cue, but at me. And for 1 second, he was just a tired man, and behind him I could see my own daughter at 9 years old, the year her rabbit died, crying so hard she couldn't breathe, and me sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark until she finally slept. I still remember the weight of her head against my arm. I wondered if she remembered it too. Then her face closed like a window pulled shut. She stood, picked up the bakery box, tucked it under her arm, and that, taking back the very thing she'd brought as a peace offering, was the most honest thing she did all morning. They left. I listened to the SUV back out and head down the street, and I sat very still. What I felt wasn't confidence exactly. There was real fear in it. These two had the means and the reasons to make my life hard for a long while, but underneath the fear was something with a harder grain to it. Roy had been afraid too, and his fear had cost us both. I'd made a different choice, and I meant to keep on making it. The hearing was the 3rd Thursday in September, in a courtroom in the courthouse downtown. All that pale wood and that institutional hush. Priya had prepared me the way Roy used to prepare for an inspection. We went over the documents again and again. She told me their lawyer mainly did real estate work, and that his grasp of estate and fraud law was, in her gentle phrase, not deep. And she told me the most powerful thing I could do in that room was simply to be what I was. A 68-year-old widow sitting quietly beside her lawyer with a folder of documents that didn't have a hole in it anywhere. You don't need to perform, she said. The evidence performs. You just need to be in the room. I wore a gray blazer and a white blouse and my flat shoes because I learned a long time ago that comfort matters when you're going to be sitting in a hard chair for hours holding yourself together. I got there before they did. I folded my hands in my lap and I waited. They came in together. She was composed, in a good navy dress, carrying herself like a woman who decided composure was the last tool left in the box. He walked half a step behind her, the way he did everything now. Their lawyer opened with what Priya had said he would, that the account changes had Roy's full knowledge and verbal blessing, a family estate planning matter, that my challenge was just a grieving widow's misunderstanding of her late husband's wishes. He was confident. He was building it all on sand. Priya's turn took half as long. She didn't editorialize. She laid the paper down in order and let the numbers talk. The power of attorney, and the date my husband died, and the dates of the transfers that came after, the withdrawals, every one of them just shy of the line that makes a bank look twice. And then the emails. The one about finishing things before the estate gets complicated, 9 days before Roy fell off our roof. I watched the judge's face and it never moved, but her pen moved, and it moved a great deal more while Priya spoke than while their man did. When they put Brenda on the stand, she held for a while. She spoke of her father with an affection she set down on the table like a prop. Then Priya asked her to explain how the phrase before the estate gets complicated squared with an open agreed-upon family arrangement, and Brenda said it was just informal shorthand. And then Priya showed her the authorization form, the one that needed my signature on the co-owner's line, the one the bank had on file with a signature on it that I had never in my life written. She asked Brenda to identify that signature, and Brenda said there might have been a processing error, and Priya asked very quietly whether Brenda was familiar with the offense of forgery under the criminal code. And for the first time, Brenda's eyes moved, not to the lawyer, not to the judge, to her husband, the reflex of a person who has run clean out of practiced answers and is reaching for a hand. And he was looking at the table. He did not look back at her. That, I think, my daughter turning toward him and finding nothing there, was its own kind of verdict, handed down before the real one ever came. The decision came 6 weeks later. I was in Priya's office when it arrived. She read it through, her face giving away nothing, the way it always did right up until she had something worth giving away. Then she looked up. "Full restitution," she said. $247,000 plus your costs, and the court has accepted the referral on the signature. That part goes to the Crown now, Mrs. Calloway. It's a criminal matter, and it'll be dealt with on its own. I didn't feel triumph. I'm not going to tell you I did. What I felt was closer to the way Roy used to describe a structure when the bad beam was finally replaced and the weight came back down where it was meant to sit. Not dramatic, just right. The way a thing feels when it finally returns to where it should have been all along. Your husband did good work, Priya said, sliding the copy across to me. He did, I said. He just waited too long to show it. You didn't, she said. There's not much triumph in the rest of it, and I find I don't want there to be. Brenda's husband lost his planning license. The regulator that oversees those things does not look kindly on what he did, and his name was on too much of it for him to hide behind hers. They sold the house in Barrie that autumn, not because they wanted to. The grandkids stayed with his mother through the worst of the upheaval, and that grieved me in a way none of the rest had, because those two children did nothing and will carry the weight of it anyway. I wrote each of them a card in my own hand with my phone number and one sentence, that their grandmother loved them and was not going anywhere. The older one, 15 now, called me. We talked for half an hour. She cried. I didn't, but it was a near thing. Brenda was charged that winter. She pleaded down in the spring. Probation, restitution, community hours, and the plain fact that her husband will not work in his field in this province again for a very long time, if ever. I was not glad she suffered, but I was glad that what was taken from me had a name and a consequence and an ending. Those are 3 different things, and you need all 3. I kept the gray house. That surprised everyone, Priya included, and it would have surprised Brenda most of all, who I think assumed I'd sell it and be done. But it was the last thing Roy ever built, that quiet, careful act of love and apology, and I wasn't ready to let it go. I had the window boxes planted with sweet alyssum and lobelia, and now I go there Tuesday mornings with a coffee and a paperback, and I sit at his little desk and do whatever I please. Sometimes I read. Sometimes I just listen. A lawnmower a street over, a kid on a bike, the ordinary good noise of a weekday in a town that never asked anything of me but to keep going. It isn't just a house. It's proof my husband knew me well enough to leave me something I didn't know I'd need. Lorna and I walk 3 mornings a week now along the boardwalk by the lake, early, before the day gets loud. In July, she told me I seemed different. I asked her how. She thought about it and said, like you've climbed back inside your own life, instead of standing out on the lawn watching it through the window. I turned that over carefully, the way Roy used to check a measurement twice, and I decided she was right. Roy always said, measure twice, cut once. He meant it about wood and steel, but it turns out it's just as true about people. Grief makes you soft, and there are people, even ones who call you mum, who know exactly how to use that softness. But I'll tell you what I learned at 68 years old, on the far side of all of it. Soft is not the same thing as weak. Soft things absorb the pressure. They don't always break. If someone you loved left you a locked door, go through it. You have every right to know what's on the other side. And if you found yourself in my chair, your own child sitting across the coffee table asking you to call a theft a gift, I'd truly like to know what you would have done. Tell me, down in the comments. And thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for listening. For a long time after it was over, I kept coming back to that envelope under the coffee can full of bolts, and to the simple fact that none of what happened to me was an accident. Roy didn't fall off that roof and leave me a mystery for the drama of it. He left me a paper trail because he'd spent 33 years learning that things don't collapse out of nowhere. They collapse because somebody pulled a beam years earlier and nobody checked. Brenda and her husband didn't wake up one morning and decide to take what wasn't theirs. They started small, with one transferred just under the line, and when nothing fell on them, they took the next one and the next, until taking from us was simply how their month went. Every step came from the step before it. That's the part I want you to sit with, because it's the part that gives you back some power. What saved me wasn't luck. It was 3 things I didn't even know I'd been building my whole ordinary life. The first was the plain refusal to call a theft a gift, no matter who was sitting across my coffee table asking me to. When my own daughter looked me in the eye and said the word fair, I could have folded, because folding would have been easier and kinder and so much quieter. I didn't, because some lines you don't cross even for the people you love most, especially for them. The second was learning to slow down and think before I reacted, driving past that gray house instead of confronting anyone, copying every page before I said a word, finding a lawyer who owed my family nothing. Roy used to say, if you can't show your work, you don't really know it, and that turned out to be true of more than engineering. And the third was the one I doubted I had at all. At 68, freshly widowed, told over and over that I was too old and too tired for this. I found out that being soft doesn't make you weak. Soft things absorb the pressure. They hold the weight long after the hard ones crack. If there's anything I'd hand to you across the table, it's this. Don't wait until you're afraid to be honest about what you see in the people closest to you. Roy waited, and his fear cost us both 2 years and very nearly everything. When the time came to push, I pushed, and the wall held, because I'd quietly made sure it could. You build that strength in the small, ordinary days, the ones that feel like nothing, the day you tell the truth when a lie would be smoother, the day you check the figures twice, the day you decide your age is not a reason to sit down. Then one Saturday morning, a silver SUV pulls into your driveway with no warning, and you find out exactly what you've been building all along.